Trey here. This is a remake of a video I did about how to remove the bolt from the Rossi 357 Magnum lever action and put the bolt back in again and put the rifle back together. A couple of things you'll need to do this: an empty shell, an empty round, okay, and a stout piece of wire. Alright, and you'll also need a little drive and a flathead screwdriver. Okay, first thing to do, make sure that the rifle is empty. Okay, just on this, and then what we want to do is remove the butt. I've already loosened off that screw, so this screw here, the upper tang screw, okay, remove that, and then remove the butt. Okay, and what you should be looking at is that. Alright, now what we want to do, the main spring's here, so we want to take the pressure off the main spring and take the pressure off the mechanism. And the way we do that is a little block here with a little V cut into it here. And this is where your little piece of wire comes in. Okay, and what we do, cock the rifle and then just press the trigger and take the pressure off the hammer so you can wiggle things about. And if you go through there with a piece of wire, there's a corresponding hole in that rod. You can go right through that rod, like so. Okay, bend your wire around, stops it falling out. And basically what you've done there is you've taken the pressure off the spring. Okay, the pressure now is on the piece of wire, okay, and not on the mechanism of the rifle. So things will seem a bit sloppy now. Just make sure, press the trigger and make sure that the hammer is fully forward. Release the trigger, okay, and leave the hammer in that position. Okay, next thing you want to do then is remove this little grub screw there. Okay. Just a tiny little grub screw, alright, like that. Keep it to one side, keep it all together in the pot with all the other stuff. Now there's a pin in here which we need to drive out, okay, but also be aware of the threads here in the receiver. You don't want to damage those threads, okay. So we'll drive it out from the other side. So flip the rifle over and you'll see a smaller hole here. I'm going to drive that pin out through that hole. Nice and gentle. Tap, tap, tap. Flip it back over and you can see the pin there. If you just give the lever a little bit of a wiggle and take hold of the end of the pin, it will just come out, okay? Now, that pin has got a little chamfered edge on one end, okay? And it's got a serrated edge on the other side, like the edge of a coin, okay? When it goes back in, it's the chamfered edge that goes back in first, okay? Keep that with your other bits. Okay, what we need to do now we're taking the pin out, is remove the lever and the block assembly, okay? And so just drop the lever, okay, and you'll see these screws here. You don't have to undo these screws to take the blocks out, okay? You can just remove the whole assembly in one hit, okay, like so. Okay, now have a look at that and just familiarise yourself with which way round that goes, and you can just take it apart and you can give it all a good clean and do what you like with it. Okay, it just goes together like that. Okay, and put it off to one side. Now what we need to do is remove the lower tang and the trigger assembly and the hammer assembly, okay? And the way we do that is remove that large screw right there. Okay, lower tang screw. Back it off. Give everything a wiggle, because it tends to grip that screw because these holes are all out of line once you start pulling it out. And that's your lower tang screw, okay? Keep that in your pot. Now, make sure the wire doesn't get caught on anything. To remove the lower tang, press the trigger and just pull back, okay? And it'll pop out. And here we got the spring, trigger spring here, like the leaf spring. Just check that screw there. Make sure it's nipped up, which it is. Give that a good clean. Okay, go off to one side. The hammer assembly now should just pop out like so. Okay, and you can see now definitely where the wire goes through that rod, and so captures the tension on the spring on the wire. Okay, like so. Keep that to one side, and now the bolt is free just to slide back out of the rifle, like so. Okay, and in here we got the ejector assembly with the spring and the little collar. Okay, just like that. So you got the ejector, okay, the spring, and that little black collar. Just keep that off to one side for the time being. And there's your bolt, okay. And make sure it's all nice and clean and the firing pin moves freely. And that's basically it. So to put it back together, basically do it in reverse. But because it's a little bit tricky to get the bolt back in, what I recommend you do first is just have a dry run, which, what I mean by that is leave out the extractor and the spring, the ejector and the spring and the collar. Just leave it off for a minute, just keep it to one side. Just put the bolt back in the receiver, okay? Just pop it in. Okay, take your lever and the block assembly, okay? That's how it goes. And then pop it up into the rifle, into the receiver. And now just slide your bolt back. And as you slide your bolt back, just wiggle the lever until you find the right place, okay, for that all to sit in. And just familiarise yourself with how far that needs to come back to be able to get that in. Okay, so just have a play with that, without the spring, without the ejector assembly in, just have a play with it and try and get the feel of it. Okay, and once you've had a bit of a play and you're happy with the situation, you know, the position of everything, just take it back out and take your bolt back out, okay? And now what we're going to do, we're going to put the bolt back in the rifle now with the ejector in place. So the ejector assembly goes in here, okay? So invert your bolt, just let it come up inside. Alright, line everything up. And now you'll see, if I capture this here, right, there's a lot of tension on there now. The tension is on that spring, okay? Well, it would be if it didn't keep slipping off. Okay, so you can see in here, you see that little collar is caught on that dog leg, okay? And that's what puts the pressure on the spring and makes this very, very springy. Okay, but what we need to do to get it back in the rifle is release that spring pressure. So allow that collar to slip underneath that dog leg like so, okay? And you'll see that the ejector just sits in there nicely and it's just staying there, okay? So basically you've got no pressure on the spring. This is where your empty shell comes in, okay? Take your empty shell and place it in the face of the bolt as if it would be, as if the bolt was chambered on a live round, okay? So it looks like that, okay? And now what we're going to do, keep your fingers out of the way. Don't hold it too close to here, because what we're going to do now is push on here and put the pressure back on the spring. But if you slip, you could puncture a finger with the drive or the screwdriver or whatever. So keep your fingers back and out of the way. Okay, and we're going to push down on that collar. There we go. So you can see it wants to eject now. So what I've done is pushed on the collar, caught the collar on the dog leg, put the pressure back on the spring. Now, the tricky bit is to keep that held together, okay, with the pressure on that round. So I find the best way to do that is to take a hold of the bolt and keep the pressure down with my thumb. You can see it moving, okay? Now what we need to do is to put it back into the receiver. So keep a downward pressure on the shell, offer it into the receiver, okay, and slide it along. And it is tricky, Oops. Take that back in a second, just moved position. So it's a bit of a fiddle, as you can see. Okay, and what you want to do is just get that round chambered slightly. Okay, and the bolt is in a back position. Okay, the bolt is open slightly. Alright, just be aware now that that round can eject. If you pull back on the bolt, that round can eject and perhaps hit you in the face, in the eye or whatever, so be careful. Okay, so what we want to do now is, you had a dry run at this earlier, remember? So pop this back into the rifle, okay, and keep your hand over the receiver to stop that round being ejected if you happen to push the bolt too far back. And wiggle it like you did earlier, okay, until it's in the right position. Okay, I'm happy with that. So now what we need to do is pop that little pin back in. Okay, so that's that little pin there. Okay, goes back in here. So the chamfered edge goes in first. So if you just wiggle the lever, drop the pin in, get it started with your finger, and just wiggle the lever a little bit, you'll find, he said, that it will go in, and you just take the pressure off it to get it in, like so. Okay, and now you can finish it off with your hammer and your drive. Be aware of the threads in here, okay, you don't want to damage them, so try and stay on the centre of the pin, tap it in. Once you go in so far, move your drive over to one side or the other, left or right, doesn't really matter, over to one of the edges. Make sure you're clear of the threads though, and then keep tapping until you feel the side of the bolt with the end of the drive. Just there. What that means is you've driven that pin in and it's flush with the side of the bolt, which is what you're trying to do, and it's roughly in that depth there. Okay? If you go too far, just flip it over and just tap it back slightly through this hole and then try again. Alright, so take your little grub screw. That's that one there. Okay, and pop that in. Get that started. Just be careful with this little grub screw, it's a bit of a fiddly thing. If it doesn't feel right, just back it off until it does feel okay. Alright, and just nip it up. Okay, so now at this point, remember you've still got an empty round in there, okay, so you need to eject that, otherwise it might take you by surprise when you operate the lever later on. So just hand over the receiver, drop the lever, and out she pops, okay? Put it off to one side. Now you've got to that point, just check that the ejector assembly there is looking how it should be, sitting nice into the face of the bolt there, all in the right position. Okay, which it looks like it is to me. I'm happy with that. Okay, so the next thing is we've got to get the hammer assembly and the lower tang back in. Okay, and it will look something like that when it's in the rifle. Okay, these holes lined up. You'll line these holes up with the hole here. Okay, it sort of looks something like that when it's in. Alright, so pop the hammer. Okay, just goes up through the upper tang like so, but don't allow it to sit on the outside of the tang like so, okay? So don't allow it to do that, sit on the top, okay? It needs to be slightly inside, okay, like that, so that the hammer is free to slide up and down inside the tang, okay? And then just keep the rod out of the way. Take the lower tang with the trigger, okay, and press the trigger in, open the lever slightly, and try and get that into the right place, okay, like so. Okay, when you're happy that that's in, what we've got to do is the end of this bar has got to be caught in this block here. Okay, so just pull back on the lower tang, drop that bar down, okay, and then try and catch it like so. Alright, it's a bit of a fiddle. You've got to try and get everything to line up. So now, the best way I've found, take your lower tang screw, okay, you should have 2 screws left at this point. You have a long one and a shorter one. It's the shorter one that you want now to go into the receiver, okay? Now the best way I found to do this is hold the end of the tang, the lower tang, press the trigger, hold that in position, and then just move the hammer assembly around and look sight down through, and you'll be able to just make sure that that hole is clear, okay? I don't know if you'll be able to see, but if I move that around, you see that I'm blocking the hole and unblocking the hole. Alright, so you want to make sure that that hole is clear. Something like that. And then drop the screw in. Okay, there we go. And then tighten that up. Alright, now just make sure before you pull the wire that the rod is still in that block, okay, which it is. Alright, so you can pull the wire now, just straighten it out a bit, okay, give things a wiggle so it loosens it off a little bit, and retrieve the wire. Once you've released the wire, you've now put the tension back on the spring, okay, and everything should be in its right place. So just give your rifle a little bit of a cycle and a test, okay. I'm happy with that, feels nice. Okay, so the last thing to do is pop the butt back on. Make sure I get that round the right way with my, yeah, little tap, and take the last screw, and it should be the last screw, okay. If you've got anything else left and you've done something wrong, you have to go back, okay, pop it in and tighten her up. Okay, before you go any further, just go back over these screws and just make sure that they are nipped up, but don't forget, fine line between a tight screw and stripping threads, so they just need to be nipped up. Okay, flip it over, just check the others on the other side. Okay, and if you're happy with that, then you're good to go. Okay, if you're not happy with it, then take it to a gunsmith and have them do it. Alright, so hopefully some of you find that interesting. Rossi 357 Magnum, take the bolt out and put it back in. Alright, thanks for watching.